This is John Karp from the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My debut album is now available on all major streaming platforms and can be downloaded on iTunes and Amazon.com. Go to johncarp.com for more details. That's JONCARP.com. Thank you.
Don't forget about me.
What's going on, everybody? You're tuned into the 48 Laws of Power podcast. My name is Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Let's get right into this book. This episode, we're going to do laws 43 and 44. Law 43 is work on the hearts and minds of others. The judgment is coercion creates a reaction that will eventually work against you. You must seduce others into wanting to move in your direction. A person you have seduced becomes your loyal pawn. And the way to seduce others is to operate on their individual psychologies and weaknesses. Soften up the resistant by working on their emotions, playing on what they hold dear and what they fear. Ignore the hearts and minds of others, and they will grow to hate you.
All right, well, by far the best example that Robert Greene gave for this law was in The Observance. And it was about this commander named Choco Leong. We've talked about Choco Leong before.
Yeah, a couple times, I think.
Yeah, I think a couple times now.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, he was the commander of the armies of Shu, which is one of the many kingdoms in this period in Chinese history. And at the time, they were at war with they had a two-front war essentially, and they were at war with the kingdom of Wei to the north, and the kingdom of Wei had gained an alliance with the barbarous states to the south of Shu, and so as we've talked about before, a two-front war is never a good position to be in.
Yeah.
So Choco Leong had to knock out one of these two very quickly and then focus his resources on the other. So he went south first to subdue the barbarous states. And the way he went about doing this is at the first battle, which he had won, he managed to capture a good majority of the opposing army's men, as well as the King of Ming Hao, which I think is how you pronounce his name. I'm not so sure, but it's something like that. We'll just say that it is. Anyway, so he captured the King of Ming Hao, and initially what he did was he treated the soldiers very well and fed them really good food, and then let them go home to their families, which was very unusual at that time.
Yeah.
And once King Min Hao's men were gone, then Leong met with King Min Hao, and basically they made this deal of, all right, I'm going to let you go, but if I capture you again, Ming Hao, then you should just surrender to me. And Ming Hao said, that's cool, sounds great. So Liang let go of Ming Hao, and Ming Hao, sure enough, got his army back together, and they attacked. And Ming Hao and his men were captured again. Mm-hmm. So you would think, okay, so Ming Hao's going to keep his end of the bargain. He definitely did not. He made up some story about some of my guys betrayed me, so it doesn't count.
It was
right?
unfair.
It was unfair.
Yeah.
And this went on for about 6 times, and Ming Hao had a different excuse every time.
Yeah.
Now, I think it was the 6th time. Sorry, it would have been 4 more times. But in any case, the 6th time that Liang captured Ming Hao, Liang said, listen, if I capture you again, I'm not letting you go. And this freaked Ming Hao out. So when he was released...
Sense of urgency.
Yeah, sense of urgency. So when he was released, he went to this region also in the south called Woog, which had a king named King Watuga. And these guys from Woog had very unusual armor. It was basically these vines that they had woven very tightly, and then they would soak them in this kind of oil, right? And when it dried, it made this very hard armor that was impenetrable, basically, to spears and whatnot.
Okay.
So these guys go marching into battle alongside Ming Hao's armies, and Ling's men lured these guys into a valley and then they basically had, I guess you could call these little fireballs around that they lit on fire, and the guys, the armies of Wook, who had these oil-soaked armor, were set ablaze because the oil was still on there and it was very flammable.
Yeah.
So they all died, and somehow Ling was able to separate Ming Hao and his men from the carnage, basically. And at this point, Ming Hao was captured once again.
Yeah.
So remember when Liang said that if I capture you again, I'm not letting you go?
Yep.
Well, Liang sent a messenger to Ming Hao saying, I'll let you go, right? So he was intending to go back on his word. But this time Ming Hao was just so taken aback by Liang and
his mercy,
that he said, no, I'm going to submit to you. Not just that, though, he was also getting a lot of pressure from his men, because not only had they been defeated by the same guy now 7 times, but also, too, they were starting to, lose their respect for their own commander, Ming Hao, because of how well Liang had treated them when they were also under captivity. So it was that combination of reasons is why Ming Hao finally submitted to Liang, and not only did Liang was he able to submit the forces in the south, he also kind of gained an ally as well.
Yep.
So they weren't just like defeated people; they became good allies.
Yep.
So he was able to focus all his attention now to the north,
despite it taking a long time. I mean, going through 7 battles, I imagine that's something that if you're in a situation like he was, where you have a 2-front war, you want to defeat one quickly and then move on to the next one. But I kind of feel like, Green kind of talks about how he had those 2 options. He had the option of being aggressive, being the aggressor, and going out there and attacking him and going that way, or to kind of play a longer game, a game where he would focus more on their hearts and minds, right? So instead of just defeating him, he wasn't going to really reach a solution that way. I mean, he would just defeat a bunch of people, but he would still have enemies. So what he ended up doing there is just working on their hearts and minds, no matter how long it took, and really turning them into allies. So now he has double the manpower to defeat the other group of people who are attacking him. So I thought that was a very kind of powerful example. Now this law, just kind of going through it, is probably one of my favorite laws. It kind of takes into account a couple previous laws we talked about, but one of the themes of the 48 laws is that of, one, power is a social thing. You obviously have to interact with a lot of people, right? And in order to make your presence felt to other people, in order for you to have, in a way, have people dependent on you, but in my opinion, kind of more to be in situations where you're working interdependently with people, where you have something they need, they have something you need, and you achieve those goals together. I feel like it's very important to get to understand people's self-interest, to see what it is that they're looking for, they're searching for, or whatever skills or goals they're trying to acquire, and you kind of get a leg up on all that when you sit back and you think about what people need and you try to achieve it that way. And that's kind of what Zhuge Liang saw here. He knew that his power, the power that he would wield, would actually be more effective if he saw what their self-interests were, which is, they didn't necessarily want to fight. They felt like they had to, but he felt like, hey, you guys will be safe if you're here with me. I'll take care of you guys. I'll do all of that. And, and really the work that he was supposed to do ended up being more efficient in that way.
Right. It's kind of funny. This law not this law per se, but this particular story kind of contradicts a different story we read in Law 15.
Yeah.
About He Sang Yu and Liu Pang.
Yeah.
I won't go through the whole story again, but
Law 15 is the do not crush your enemy.
Crush your enemy totally. Yeah. So basically to kind of water this down to get to the meat of the matter, He Sang Yu had been, had many opportunities to basically capture Pang and destroy his entire army.
Yeah.
And through various reasons, he hesitated, and Pang was able to escape. And then at some point, Pang was able to turn the tables, and he captured He Sang Yu, and he did not allow Yu the opportunity to escape. He actually just had him executed.
Yeah.
And that was the end of that.
Yeah.
So, whereas in this story that
in a way, he kind of used the other person's kindness for weakness, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, so in this story, we find that, this could have very well have happened to Liang.
Mm-hmm.
Would Meng Hao have shown the same amount of mercy to Liang that Liang showed to Meng Hao?
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about this earlier, and it's a question that I posed, like what would have prevented Meng Hao from, basically doing what Pang did to you?
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing about it was that Liang didn't just appeal to Meng Hao; he appealed to Meng Hao's men, and it was his men's It was Meng Hao's men's frustration with Meng Hao that was part of the reason why Meng Hao finally did submit to Liang. So I think it's one of those things where you're more trying to appease a group of people rather than just one individual.
Yeah.
Because one individual is weak alone, but an individual that has others backing them up can be very powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that was the X factor there, because I feel like with Pang, or was it Pang? It was Pang and Liu Pang and Xiang Yu. Yeah. Their conflict was really one-on-one. It was I think that tended to just deal with kind of ego kind of spars that they had, and it didn't necessarily affect a lot of other people. I feel like with them, Pang was the one who was on the run, or who eventually turned the tables. Pang was in a situation where he was actually able to round up people, and he had other places to go, even though he kept being defeated. I feel like in this situation here with Shuko Liang is, his enemy had nowhere to turn. Like, there's nothing else he could have done, because their conflict wasn't one-on-one the same way it was for Sang Yu and Liu Pang. Here the conflict was me versus all of you, and he showed his gratitude to those people, and so it felt like they had no reason to even really battle.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that it works well on like a big group of people, basically.
Yeah.
I think politicians use this quite a lot.
I think so.
The number one guy that comes to my mind is Obama.
Yeah.
I think his whole campaign for his first election was, built on the idea of hope and change and all that, and that really spoke to people.
Because who doesn't want hope?
No, exactly. Who doesn't want that? And it's one of those things where whether or not, and this might be getting into, Law 45 a little bit, but, preach the need to change, but not change too much.
Yeah.
Point is that whether or not, he was going to be able to create the changes that he said that he was going to is probably not likely, but it didn't matter. He appealed to people's hearts and their minds and their emotions and everything.
Absolutely.
And that's the key.
I actually think this law and one of the previous laws we talked about, where it was don't win through argument but win through showing people, and the law about giving and taking, but I forget exactly the number, but I feel like these three laws, this law and those two previous laws, the through line is about the importance of getting into other people's minds and seeing their self-interests and using that kind of to your benefit. I feel like that's extremely important in today's world. I feel like it's always important because, again, power is a social it's a very social thing. You know what I mean? You have to be around people. You have to know how to interact with people and all that stuff. And that's kind of where social intelligence comes from too, where you have to effectively deal with other people. Now, what Green mentioned in the keys to power here is he said that in general there's just a bunch of people out there. It's like if you want to get certain things done, you kind of have to convince other people to come to your side, right? In whatever way. And the best way to do that is to see what they're thinking, see what, what's in their heads, and then supply that to them, right?
Right.
I feel like there's a lot of examples with this. I think in general, if you're looking at someone who, is looking for a job, someone who, is trying to get out there, you kind of have to market yourself in a way where no matter what industry you're working on, if you go out there and you look at all the companies that are out there, you kind of have to think in terms of the person running that company, or and seeing what their problems are, what things that they're trying to get solved. And then when you market yourself that way. Market yourself in a way where you go, listen, I'm going to solve these problems that you have. I'm going to serve you and get these things done. I feel like you can do that whether you're marketing yourself or if you're, maybe you start your own business, or if you're like the boss of a company, right? Where it's like you're providing goods and services, but you also have to know what the people out there, what your customers want. You have to get in their heads and see what their needs are, and then when you supply that, then they'll come to you. But it's like you get that work done, the more the more intentional you are about thinking what other people need. And once you've worked on people's hearts and minds in that way, the work is done. There's nothing else you really have to do. You don't have to convince anyone or anything. You don't have to. You kind of convince people using brute force or anything else. They'll do the work for you because you've done that before, and they're satisfied with your ability to kind of read their minds and so on and so forth. But I think there's a lot of examples for this. But I think it's, especially in today's age, very important. I think it's always been important. It's also important in relationships, whoever you're dealing with. You kind of have to know what's in their heads. You have to be thoughtful about things they like, things they don't like, so on and so forth. But.
Well, there's three things that you brought up that I think we can dive into a little bit more. The first thing is what was a common theme in what you were just saying was trying to get into the heads of people, trying to figure out what they're thinking. Yeah. And so the first question one might ask is, well, how do I go about doing that, right? Yeah. How do you figure out what's going on in someone else's head? Because it's not like we're broadcasting out of our ears what's going on in our head. Yeah. Right. So you could do that by, in order to get people to open up about what's going on in their mind, you really have to become disciplined in learning to listen more than talk. Yeah. I think especially nowadays, people listen so that they can comment. They don't listen to actually hear what the other person's saying.
100%.
So if you can train yourself to actually seriously listen to what somebody's saying, that's going to give you basically a window into their mind. And you can figure out, okay, this is what this person's thinking. How can I get this person on my side for this business I'm trying to build or this cause I'm trying to promote? Or, if you're dating, actually, you can figure out, okay, this is what, he or she is thinking. Mm-hmm. How can I adjust what I'm saying to get this person to become interested in me? Yeah. Right? Absolutely. So it's using a lot of applications. So there's that. Another thing another way of thinking about this is that, let's say there's a big cause that you're for, right? Mm-hmm. You want to, there's this kid who's working on trying to clean up the big Pacific plastic ring out in the Pacific Ocean, right? So, okay, that's a really noble cause, but how you can get a bunch of, that requires a lot of people to work on that. That requires engineers and scientists, and then you got to get people who are going to sail the ship out there. How are you going to get them to agree to that? Like, yeah, sure, people will want to work for that because it's a great cause, but at the same time, they got to feed their families and stuff. So, and that's where pay comes in. Yeah. Really, compensation. You're like, hey, here's this great cause, but I'll also pay you. And people are like, well, that's a win-win. Yeah. I get to contribute something and I get something for myself. Exactly. And that's kind of the point. It's not enough to just have people want to contribute to something bigger. They also have to have something for themselves in it. They have to get something out of it for themselves as well.
They have to kind of get their needs/wants met.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the third thing you kind of touched on a little bit was displays of overt power. Mm-hmm. It's something that, it very rarely has worked in times past, as you've said. But I think it's especially true now with people being, first of all, having large amounts of access to information that they haven't had really before.
Yeah. At their fingertips.
Yeah, because of the internet
cases,
and everything. Yeah. I mean, not since the Gutenberg press has there been such a revolution in ideas.
Yeah, seriously.
So there's that. So like someone could, if you're trying to enforce your will, you know, someone can communicate that to somebody else, and then they can communicate that to somebody else, and before you know, you have this whole web of resistance, so to speak, right?
Absolutely.
And not just that, but strangely enough, even though we're able to create these webs of resistance through our through the internet, strangely enough, we probably live in the most isolated time, at least in the Western world in human history.
Yeah.
And which sounds ironic, but it makes sense because all your communications being done on like your computer or on your phone. It's not being face to face.
We're all living alone together,
basically.
Yeah.
So, and strangely enough, when you're kind of isolated, you become more suspicious.
Mm.
So when someone starts becoming a little bit more like overly authoritative, right, or dictatorial, all of a sudden, like the likelihood the red flags to go up, it goes up like dramatically. Whereas, you know, if you're not like as paranoid, you know, it's a lot easier to be overt with your power, right?
Yeah.
But not when everyone's already in a paranoid state.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I totally get that. I mean, the overt uses of power, we've kind of like it's one of those things where even something like something dating back to when you think of Gandhi, kind of what Gandhi was doing with kind of nonviolent stuff, and how really he was able to galvanize people by just, you know, showing how overt power was being misused, I guess. Mm-hmm. The same way Martin Luther King Jr. and the people he was with kind of did that too, where you kind of juxtapose the overt power with the, you know, we're peacefully sitting in here and doing this and that, to maybe even in some cases when how people always have their phones up, and you can kind of see like if they're in a situation with, like, you know, if like the police or something like that. And it's one of those things where it kind of rings even more true nowadays about how, you know, the overt use of power is something that isn't necessarily as effective as it probably might have been years and years and years ago.
Right.
And I feel like that's obviously in this law kind of in direct contrast with how effective it is to communicate to communicate kind of how, but by working on other people's, you know, hearts and minds and things like that, and communicating that effectively, what you essentially have is an ally. You don't necessarily have someone you're fighting against to get your will done, but by, you know, kind of like you're saying, listening with an intent to understand, and then providing that for them, you can actually, you know, you can set up a win-win situation where you're not, like Robert Greene says, you're not moving a pawn around, but that person, because, you know, they understand kind of the goal you're after, and it matches their goal, that they're able to do the work for you. You don't really have to micromanage or get any of that done. And I think that's something that is very important as a leader in whatever industry you work in. You know, whether you're involved in, you know, like war or whether you're just a boss of a company, you know, you can just, you know, I noticed that a lot of places I've worked at previously, there's always a mission statement that's up on the wall. A lot of times, man, you know, you see those things and it's really kind of generic, and it's just like, oh, you know, our vision is to do our work great, you know. But in some cases, like for the people who really thought those mission statements out, and they kind of sat down with the people they worked with, and they're able to flesh that out even more, and that everyone can agree on. I think that's probably the most effective thing you can do for your coworkers and stuff, where you guys are all working to an end together. And so there's no one to micromanage, no one to force around to do anything. They'll just go do their work, and it'll be satisfying for them. And so, yeah, for those reasons, you know, I think this law is it's one of my favorite laws, along with the other two kind of self-interest related, or social intelligence kind of related laws.
Yeah, well, you mentioned micromanaging. If you want to get people to jump off of a cause real quick, go ahead and micromanage them.
Yep.
Yeah, because they're not going to have because they feel like they're just being told what to do at that point. It's like too much. It's like what I was saying. It's too much of an overt display of your power, and people were like, I don't want to deal with
Yeah.
this. But getting on to the idea about this law being about, working on people's emotions and playing to their intellectual weaknesses, you had mentioned Martin Luther King.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, let's think about it this way. Intellectually speaking, segregation makes absolutely no sense. Like, well, these people have this colored skin, so they should eat at this restaurant, and these people have this colored skin, so they should eat at that restaurant. Like, that's insane.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense. But here's the thing with, like, segregation in the South at that time. Even though it makes absolutely no intellectual sense whatsoever, if there's that passion of anger and hatred for one group of people, all of a sudden people will that ends up overriding the intellectual hardware there.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden people will go, well, no, it totally makes sense that black people should eat from a separate restaurant than white people.
For a lot of factors too. It could have been also, traditionally, they had known only that, and all these other things.
Yeah.
And
there's that too.
combined with the passion and kind of the emotion tied with it.
But that's the thing, is like tradition, like a tradition like that plays on emotion and not reason.
Exactly.
Right? Because there are some traditions that are worth keeping, and there are some traditions that you look at and you go, this doesn't make any sense. Let's get rid of this, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That would be one of those traditions that doesn't make any sense, rather.
Yeah.
Anyway, so bearing that in mind, how do you counteract that, right? Well, you do what Martin Luther King did. You basically use the same tactic in a way. But you also add the you play into the intellectual weakness. So you point out, like, this makes no sense intellectually that we're separating one group of people from another group of people and treating one group of people differently from another group of people. Intellectually makes no sense because we're all human beings. We're the only difference between this group of people and that group of people is our color of their skin, and that's nothing. That's as significant as the color of one's eyes, right?
Yeah.
And so people go, okay, yeah, intellectually that makes sense. And not only that, but he also played up on the moralistic issue with it.
Yeah.
It's not right that blacks are being put into schools and basically all their materials are falling apart while the whites have the nice schools and the nice books and everything.
Yeah.
It's not moralistically right that we're treating one group of people as less than another group of people. There needs to be equality. Yeah. So that combination of intellectual reasoning and moral righteousness, so to speak, kind of gave fuel for the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
And, eventually it helped to end segregation and the Jim Crow laws of the South.
Yeah, and another thing too is the like something like the "I Have a Dream" speech, right, where talked a lot about the vision for the future, where it's like he kind of painted a kind of a utopian thing, a kind of a utopian society, like you were saying. I have a dream where little black boys and little black, little white boys, little black girls. You were saying everyone together can kind of coexist in peace, all this other stuff. But it's like he was able to, for a lot of those people in that, a lot of people in that crowd, their lives were marginalized and it wasn't up to par. They were clearly unsatisfied with life at that moment, and by painting a picture as powerful as that, kind of something utopian like, as something to strive for, I think he was able to because one, he was really kind of, we're going to talk about this, the next law, but he was really kind of mirroring everyone's kind of insecurities and their fears and all that. And he was saying these fears don't have to exist anymore. You know what I mean? Things here on earth could be kind of like heaven, where everyone's coexisting in peace and all that. And I think that the use of that, which obviously he had to kind of tap into people's self-interest, obviously, and I think he tapped into the blacks and the whites at the time, because even even whites were sitting there like that world that the image that he's painting isn't a bad image, you know what I mean? And like you were saying, there's kind of the marriage of the intellectual with the kind of the moralistic view of things.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, because it's not like, I mean, there were plenty of whites who were like, this is ridiculous. I want to like have lunch with my buddy who's black, but we can't even sit in the same restaurant.
Exactly,
like, what's the deal with that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
for all the people who might have been like, who maybe didn't feel like they had a voice, but who felt that way, they were like, yeah, he's right. You know what I mean? And so on top of all this, because he did talk a lot about in the chapter, Green talked not a lot, but he talked a little bit about who was it? It was Mao Zedong, and about how kind of an effective speaker he was because he knew how to tap into everyone in the audience.
Right.
Kind of feel like Martin Luther King Jr. kind of did the same thing with that speech because he was able to tap into everyone's kind of their fears, insecurities, all that stuff, and to kind of project a future where those fears and insecurities don't exist.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's also, but again, he did it, again, through just kind of marrying the kind of the intellectual, I guess combating against the intellectual weaknesses and also just introducing that moral view of, we're all human beings, we should work together, so on and so forth.
Well, and the two groups of people who are most effective at doing this sort of thing are artists and intellectuals. I mean, obviously, Martin Luther King was an intellectual, so we see how that played out.
Exactly.
And artists do the same thing. In fact, if you ask someone like Jordan Peterson, he would say that the job of an artist is to go into a sort of an intellectual realm that even the artist themselves is not entirely aware of, and that's in the process of creating that piece of music or literature or painting. They're getting at the truth of whatever it is they're discovering, and that's kind of
make it simple
and make it so that people can understand what's going on. So the key there is if you can get the artists and the intellectuals on your side, you're gonna have a pretty powerful thing behind you, because especially like the arts, because the arts work on the emotions very strongly, right?
Yeah.
So it was one of the reasons that it could be used for good or bad. Hitler used the music of Richard Wagner, which is very powerful music, to instill like German pride, right? And that we're the chosen people, and that's how he was a part of the reason why he was able to, make people believe that, yes, it's okay to go ahead and round up Jews and gays and gas them and whatever.
And he was an artist himself.
He was an artist himself.
He's also a very effective speaker. I feel like if you're someone who has to, again, like we're saying, power is it's a social thing. So, I mean, if you're good at speaking in front of a lot of people, you obviously have kind of the tools to pick up on, again, the collective self-interest and see, where it is that they're lacking, see their fears and the weaknesses, things like that.
Yeah.
And then project the future, whether that's positive or negative.
Yeah. Well,
essentially, Martin Luther King Jr. and Hitler were doing the same thing, except there was something kind of more positive with Martin Luther King Jr.'s view and something more
What even Martin Luther King reached out to artists like Bob Dylan played at a lot of these civil rights rallies.
Okay.
And his music definitely spoke to this need for this change and recognizing that we're all really the same regardless of our skin color. Folks like him, Peter, Paul, and Mary also. And then you can list as many black artists as possible that were also, obviously
kind of involved in that effort.
Or exactly. It's just one of those like the Vietnam War, the protests for that was highly fueled by particularly musicians.
100%.
You have everyone from Buffalo Springfield and you got Jimi Hendrix, who were obviously very much against the war, and having those musicians be that kind of voice for this anti-war movement gave it more power.
Were the Beatles? They were broken up by that point, but
no. They because remember Vietnam went through 1961 to 75.
61 to 75. Okay.
So the Beatles were very much against the war.
Yeah.
The Beatles were kind of in a unique place because being British, they were kind of like an outside point of view.
Yeah.
But they also spoke definitely to the anti-war movement, and
I know definitely John Lennon.
Well, there was in his solo career, Give Peace a Chance and Happy Christmas, War is Over.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Yeah.
A lot of his career was about promoting this idea of world peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very effective at doing that.
Oh, and it worked. I mean, he took out billboards that say, "War is over if you want it."
Yeah.
That's using the medium of art and actually commercialism to promote the idea of peace.
Yeah.
So I would actually say you could even throw business people in if you can get
especially nowadays
mixed in. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
definitely.
It's your most powerful vote is what you pay for.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you could convince business people to go along with this, this notion of, this is how things ought to be.
Yeah.
If you can combine the business people with the artists and the intellectuals, you got a pretty good thing going.
100%.
You know what? Throw in scientists in there too.
Yeah.
You know,
Scientists are artists in a way too.
Yeah, kind of.
Like Jordan Peterson. I mean, he's he's an intellectual period, but I think his background is kind of, it's psychology. It's
It's a type of science. It's a soft science.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's kind of, he's one of those people where he galvanizes a lot of people and stuff, and he knows a lot about kind of the myths and kind of spiritual and religious texts and things like that. So in a way, by diving so deep into stuff like that, it's you kind of develop a poetic sense about you.
Yeah.
And I think he's definitely a kind of guy like that. I think who could really kind of get into people's heads and things like that.
And it all plays in together. I mean, the most economically viable communities are ones that have a great deal of artists and intellectuals around too.
Okay.
There's a reason why. Recently North Carolina is experiencing a bit of a boom economically speaking, and part of the reason is because a lot of artists started moving into that triangle area of Durham, Rollin,
RDU,
and Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
And
good schools out there too.
Well, that's the thing is you have a lot of schools, a lot of colleges, you have a lot of intellectuals running around, obviously.
Yeah.
And then the artists started going there because they tend to link up with the intellectuals pretty well.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, oh, I really like the music. So then all of a sudden commerce starts going there because businesses are like, here, come to my restaurant and listen to so-and-so.
Yeah.
And then other businesses want to move there because people want to be around culture because it gives them a sense of community.
Absolutely.
And then, so that's, one thing benefits the other, I guess. Absolutely. Is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess the last point I wanted to bring up before we go to reversal is, and I meant to kind of add this before, but you brought up business, and I know I've talked about kind of marketing yourself and if you're selling and things like that. But yeah, I one of the reasons I really do love this law is because I've seen it in action. I've kind of seen it in action a little bit. But yeah, there's a kind of a businessman, entrepreneur named Gary Vaynerchuk, and his whole strategy is he what he calls it a what's it called? Essentially, what it is give, and then take. So his thing is jab, right hook, right? So it's like by giving as much as you can, by kind of serving really kind of your audience or your customers and all this other stuff, by constantly giving, at some point you'll get to a point where you go, guys, look, I've given up content for months and months, just free content to you guys. And I've served you to a certain point. Now that I've done all this work, do me a favor and just buy this thing, and kind of do that. And then people go, okay, yeah, we'll do that because you've the things that we need, the things that we're interested in, and you've given it to us at free of cost just because you're serving us. And so because of that, we'll do you a favor and we'll kind of get this thing. I think it's that mindset is good because the way I think in order to be successful, I feel like you kind of have to have the mentality of I'm serving these people, whether you're a coworker, you could say like, oh, I'm serving my boss. I know what needs he has. I'm going to do that. I'm going to put myself in a lower position and I'm going to serve. And by doing that, kind of law one stuff, never outshine the master, do things for them. And just, get used to that mentality of being patient, waiting your turn, and just providing as much as you can. Same thing to if you're a boss, serve your customers, serve your workers, you know what I mean? And if you get used to that mindset, I feel like that's kind of like the path to success. You know what I mean? Don't always think of, oh, these are the things I could get, but think of, oh, I'm supplying a need for these people.
Right.
And by doing that, you gain favor with them. They like you more, they support you more. You have allies. And you don't have to really do a lot of the work of, you know what I mean? Like they based on the direction that you set forth, they follow that, and they're followers of you. So it's I've kind of seen that in action. I've seen it with the things he does because he's on YouTube, podcast. He does something every day. And his popularity is out of control. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's this law definitely rings true with that case study.
Absolutely, yeah. Reversal
time, very simple. Robert Greene says there's no reversal for this law.
Okay.
And just this is what it is.
Law 44.
Love it. Those are my favorite laws when there's just nothing.
Because you don't have to do anything.
Law number 44 is disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect. The judgment is, the mirror reflects reality, but it is also the perfect tool for deception. When you mirror your enemies, doing exactly as they do, they cannot figure out your strategy. The mirror effect mocks and humiliates them, making them overreact. By holding up a mirror to their psyches, you seduce them with the illusion that you share their values. By holding up a mirror to their actions, you teach them a lesson. Few can resist the power of the mirror effect.
Okay, so this is one of those laws where we're just going to go through. Robert Greene lists 4 different mirror effects, if you will.
Yeah.
And the reversal is a little bit different too, because it's not a reversal; it's a warning.
Yeah.
But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Why he did that?
Just to make us work harder,
Yeah.
I think. So one of the 4 effects is what's called the neutralizing effect, and this is basically when you're mirroring another's actions. It has a negating effect of their actions, and this gives you the upper hand because you're able to predict their next moves and how you can circumvent them. So basically, it's kind of like, sort of like when you were a kid and you were irritating another kid, and you would just like mimic everything they were doing.
Yeah.
And like the other kid would get like really angry, start foaming up the mouth, and then you could, you just you had an effect on their emotion.
Absolutely.
It's kind of the same thing, but it's a little bit more evolved in that you're mimicking, like if one company is trying to take you down, right? You're mimicking what that company's doing, and by doing that, it irritates them, and they start acting rash.
Yeah.
And then also too, because you're mimicking them, you know what their next step is going to be.
Yeah.
And you can prepare something to circumvent that step and either subdue them or take them out, depending
100%.
on what's going on between your company and that company.
100%.
I mean, it's generally speaking, companies don't go after each other like that, but sometimes they do.
Yeah.
So
I like what Robert Greene did here too, because he talked about Medusa.
yeah.
Just the story there where people couldn't, I guess, defeat her because they were turned to stone because of how ugly she was,
Right.
and everything like that. So I guess the person who defeated her pulled up a mirror. She saw herself, and she was neutralized by that. She didn't know what was going on, and then he went in there and I guess slit her throat or whatever else.
The story is Medusa was what was called a gorgon,
Mhm.
and these gorgons were hideous women who had snakes in their hairs and stuff like that. And
I know a few gorgons. Kidding.
But anyway, yeah. So apparently she was so hideous that you would turn to stone. And
Yeah.
Perseus had a shield that was also a mirror.
Yeah. Okay.
So he could hold it up and see where she was at
Yeah.
and kind of mimic her movement. And then when the time was right, he could lop off her head.
Yeah. So essentially, he kind of lulled her into a false sense of security in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
The same way, I guess, for Law 3, where they talk about, I think it's Law 3, where they're talking about this using a kind of a smoke screen.
That's
Right.
basically what he was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of like what this law is
Yeah.
you're using this as a smoke screen because you're mimicking the other person.
Exactly, yeah.
So they can't read into your strategy because
Exactly.
your strategy is the same as their strategy.
Exactly, yeah.
Basically, yeah.
And it either infuriates them or it makes them go, oh, I can relax. He's like me in a way.
Yeah.
Right, by shadowing them. And yeah, like you're saying, there's that extra dimension when you shadow them because, like the same way shadow is always behind someone. It's like you follow all their moves enough that you know their routines, you know everything about them, and then you can use that against them.
Yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. And then there's the narcissist effect, which is mimicking a person psychologically and reflecting their innermost feelings to disarm them. So it's sort of similar to the neutralizing effect, except instead of it being, kind of overt and more physical, I guess you could say, it's more psychological.
Yeah.
You can use this a lot in dating. Like if you see that someone that you are really into likes, I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, you can read up on Dungeons and Dragons and
become an expert.
become an expert and really like get their attention.
Yeah.
Right. It's so a lot of people use this in dating a lot, but you can also use it in therapists use this quite a lot. There was Robert Greene mentioned one story about this one gentleman who was convinced that he was Jesus Christ, and it didn't matter how many therapy sessions this guy went to or how much medication he was on, he was still convinced he was Jesus Christ. So this one therapist was hired to do something about this guy, right? And, obviously this guy knew who Jesus Christ was, so...
God, what a nightmare.
To think that you're Jesus Christ?
Yeah, to be to be related to him. You have to tell him, Jesus. Oh, I can't even. You can't even say Jesus.
You can't even say Jesus.
Like what?
Yeah. Well, in any case, so he met with this guy, and basically, as he was sitting in the sessions with this guy, he would say, "I'm given to understand that you have some experience in carpentry." And of course, the guy who thought he was Jesus, was like, "Oh yes, of course." And he's like, "Well, that's great, because I have a bookshelf that needs to be fixed, and this table is pretty wobbly. You think you could fix this, for me?" And the guy was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So, and the thing, what happened was this guy who thought he was Jesus, he spent so much time focusing on the craftsmanship of the carpentry work that the whole idea of him being Jesus just went to the back of his head because he was finally grounded in reality.
Yeah.
So it was basically all the psychologists did was basically kind of get into his psychology and basically kind of revert it and bring it back to reality.
Wow.
Which is pretty amazing.
That's brilliant, actually. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's similar to, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Or you could just bring a bunch of water to him and go, listen, I have a party.
I want you to walk across my pool.
Yeah, exactly.
If you could do that, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Jesus.
That's a little cruel, I would say.
Yeah, it is very cruel. Very unethical.
Yeah, I would say the carpentry work was a little more subtle.
Absolutely.
And more effective.
Yeah, I liked this narcissist effect because you like you were saying, you could actually lull some. Well, you could for someone who tends to be a little narcissistic and who kind of loves himself and things like that. When you pick up on some of the mannerisms and you pick up on things that they pick up on, they essentially fall in love with you, kind of in a way where they have that. It doesn't necessarily have to be love, but they have that innate connection with you because you in a way remind them of them, right? The same way, like if you're trying to get a mentor, let's say you're working in some industry and you're a younger guy and trying to figure stuff out, and you kind of approach an older kind of mentor, and they see a lot of the characters that they used to have in you, then they'll be like, oh, they'll be kind of nicer to you, and they'll kind of take you under their wing and they'll teach you all they know because you remind them of themselves, and I feel like it's it's a very powerful tool.
Right on.
But people react. I tend to think people would react differently to that, though. On whether or not you remind them of them, because some people kind of when they see kind of the same patterns that they have reflected in someone else, they can kind of seize up or whatever else. So.
Well, that kind of brings us to the next effect, which is the moral effect. Right, mirroring what other people have done to you is a great way to make them realize their wrong actions. So, like what you were saying, if you're mimicking them and doing the wrong thing that they've been doing, all of a sudden it gets them to realize, oh, I've been a real jerk.
That thing was wrong.
Wait, why are you doing this to me? Well, you've been doing this to me,
100%.
And they're like, oh, okay,
100%.
So you can. You can use the moral effect in that instance.
I think the moral effect is the most effective out of all these.
It's used by parents and teachers a lot,
all the time.
Yeah,
I had there was a young lady I used to talk to quite a lot a while ago, and I remember we communicate through the phone and things like that, and I wasn't always great at getting back to her, right? So sometimes, because I had stuff going on, so sometimes like she would call one day, and then I would call back maybe 2 days later, or whatever. But it was whenever I got really busy. So one day she did the same thing to me, and then I remember I was like, I really need to get in contact with this person, but she's not calling me back. And then she called me back a couple of days later. I was like, listen, I get it. I apologize, but it's a very effective thing to use on people, especially especially like you're saying, like, someone who's kind of younger, maybe someone who's kind of like immature and doesn't really understand the full scope of how their actions affect other people. When they, by doing this, it can, I guess in a way, ground them, I guess, and yeah, and see how their actions affect other people.
Right. Yeah. And then there's a hallucinatory effect. So this is creating a copy of a person, place, or thing. And this is often used in deception. So
a little bit more of a sinister edge to this.
Yeah. Although
it's like a funhouse mirror. Well, actually, no. It's a mirror, but
it's a mirror. A mirror
a
mirror doesn't project an exact reality.
Yeah.
It's a reverse, right? So left is right, right is left
there you
in
go.
a mirror, right? It is something that like con artists use a lot. Like there was, Robert Greene mentioned in the book this one gentleman who basically he bought this bank that was going to be renovated, and he bought it and he kept everything around, and in fact he made the bank look like a functioning bank. He had like dollar bills on top of like wads of newspaper to look like there was more money.
Yeah.
And he would keep them in the bag and show like, oh yes, this is a real bank. There were people that he knew that were, basically they were like prostitutes and or pimps or whatever, and he would just have them come in randomly and pretend like that they were customers or tellers or whatever.
Yeah.
And so he would find wealthy people and say that, oh, he was a representative of the bank and he had a great loan offer.
Yeah.
And so he bring this person to this bank that looked like a functioning bank, and then they would talk business more, and he would say, oh, I gotta go get the president, and it would just be some guy that he hired that he knew, and he would have the sucker, so to speak, wait for a while for this president, because that's just how it is in banks. You have to wait a while for the president, right?
Yeah.
And because if he just come out right away, it would have been pretty fishy.
Yeah.
So anyway, this guy who was the sucker would wait quite a while for the president to come out, and the president would talk to him about this loan offer, and the sucker would see this as being a legit operation and would take it hook, line, and sinker, and would lose their money to this con artist.
Jesus.
So there's that. But going back to that therapy example I was giving you earlier, that's a positive way you can use it, because in a way, that therapist, while yes, he was kind of feeding into a sort of the narcissistic sense that this guy who thought he was Jesus had, he was also kind of playing the hallucinatory effect on him, like by playing into that hallucination.
Yeah.
Right. So it's something that can be used for good as well. You can kind of take it. You can use it to you can kind of play into the hallucinatory effect to get someone out of their hallucination, so
100%.
to speak. I don't necessarily mean that in just you can only use this on the mentally ill. I mean, people are in denial who are perfectly healthy about all kinds of things.
100%.
Right?
100%. This effect is, I don't know if you've ever seen one of these two movies, but I mean, it was good. I like those two examples you used, where one of them was kind of used on someone who's kind of mentally ill, and another one was just a con artist.
Right.
There's a movie called Matchstick Men. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
That it's the same kind of thing here, where it's a con being run, right? Where they're all actors in this con, except for the victim, obviously. But things are made to look a certain way, right? Where So it's all. I don't want to ruin the plot of the movie, but it's essentially that. It's all a con. So it's like a mirror where you see it as a reflection and stuff, but things aren't really kind of as they seem, or things are just backwards.
Okay, yeah.
Another example of that is a movie called Shutter Island. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. Yeah.
So in that movie, it's a guy who thinks he's someone else. He's kind of disassociated because of something that happened in his past, right?
Yeah.
And the whole movie, things are made to look a certain way. There's actually, and this is kind of a spoiler, I don't care. Fast forward if you don't want to hear it, but it's things are made to look a certain way, right? But the whole time, they're all actors also, and they're all playing into the fact that they're agreeing that he is the person who he is or whatever. And then at the end, there's kind of a flip on it, where they're essentially showing things back to him and trying to, I guess, kind of using the moral effect here, kind of showing him these are the things you believe. Are you sure it's true? And then, he always gets to that end where he realizes, oh, I'm not the person I've been claiming to be. I'm actually this person. But then he always switches back and goes back to the beginning. But it's essentially kind of the hallucinatory effect where, everyone kind of conspires to kind of feed into to something for that person, essentially to seem like a mirror, to make things seem the way they are or whatever, but it's really not, I guess.
Yeah. Wow.
But check those two movies out. Anyone listening, Matchstick Men and Shutter Island.
Yeah,
I think they're perfect.
Check out Leverage too, because it's the same thing, except it's these guys who try to catch people who are trying to rob from innocent people.
Okay.
So they kind of create like they play into like this, basically like what the con artist did. With the bank, they set up similar situations like that, and they get the guy these bad people arrested or whatever.
Huh. Or like, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That made me think of, remember those To Catch a Predator shows?
It's
kind of like that. And they also had another series called To Catch a, it was like people who would run scams online.
Yeah.
It was the same kind of thing where they have someone posing as like a sucker who wants money quick or something.
Yeah.
And then those people feed. And they're like, yeah, whatever, I'll send you money, and just send me $50,000, and I'll send you. They'll send me $5,000, I'll send you $50,000.
Yeah.
And then they ended up tracking those people, finding them. Yeah. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we there are many examples of the hallucinatory effect being used, for bad, obviously, but also for good.
Absolutely.
So please use it for good.
100%.
And with that, let's go to the warning.
Let's go right to the warning. In my opinion, I feel like the warning kind of touches on a previous thought we talked about, which is not stepping into a great man's shoes. Now, the main thing with this warning is to avoid situations where essentially the mirror effect will be to your detriment, and that's out of your control. A situation where, perhaps historically, you're in a same situation where someone did something negative. And there's an audience involved or a public that's related to that, because then they'll see the situation you're in, and immediately, despite what you do, they'll already go to the conclusion, which is, oh, we were screwed last time when this thing happened, so we'll be screwed this time around. So I'll give kind of one example, and then I'll talk a little bit about the example that Green talked about in here. But if you're ever in a situation, let's say where let's say you get a job, right, and the person that worked that job previously, maybe that sat in your exact chair, whatever, was just completely incompetent, right? So now you come in, and maybe you're still trying to, kind of learn the ropes a little bit, but you sit back in the same chair, and maybe the first day exhibit some signs that are kind of similar. People will be like, oh, this person is incompetent too, and he sucks and whatever else. And they might not give you enough kind of rope to maybe, kind of, demonstrate how unique you are or whatever else. But it's a situation where there's history involved, and that's out of your control. There's nothing you can really do about that, except there's always something you could do, but a certain part of it is kind of out of your control, and people just go, oh, this happened before, so he's going to do it again. So there's a mirror involved there in terms of history and the present situation. Now, the example that Robert Greene talked about was Lola Montez. She was in a relationship. I'm not sure. She was essentially in a relationship with a ruler in that area, where the ruler essentially financed her and kind of gave her money to stay afloat, and she had kind of her own place near the palace and everything else, and because of that ruler's kind of contributions to financing her and things like that, the area that they lived in essentially kind of got bankrupted or something like that. So now, fast forward to much later, I believe it was Richard Wagner.
Yeah, it was. It was. Richard Wagner and
Ludwig II.
Yes, who was the grandson of the Ludwig who had basically funded Lola Montez.
Yeah. Okay. And so the same kind of situation happened where, Richard Wagner essentially lived pretty close to where Lola Montez lived.
Mhm.
So there was that connection that people who lived there saw. They were like, oh, he lived near where Lola Montez was. And it was the same situation where Ludwig II was financing Richard Wagner. And so people kind of picked up on it, and they're unhappy with it, essentially. So it's kind of a throwback to the, not stepping in a great man's shoes, but kind of in the negative way, where you don't necessarily want to step into a terrible person's shoes either, because then people see the connections and they don't give you as much. They don't give you as much benefit of the doubt, I guess.
Or if you do step into a bad person's shoes, then follow Law 41 and do whatever you can do to differentiate yourself from that person.
Exactly.
Which is what Richard Wagner did not do.
Mm-hmm.
And he got chased out of Bavaria much in the same way that Lola Montez did.
Poor Lola Montez. Yeah.
I don't want to say poor Richard Wagner because he was kind of a jerk, but
yeah. So that's essentially the warning. Be aware of negative situations that have happened in the past, and don't try to align yourself with that in any way. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So
all right, cool.
With that, this is the 48 Laws of Power podcast. Talked about laws 43 and 44. My name's Rudy Malumba.
And I'm John Karp.
Signing out. Well, that was our take. What do you think? Email us at the 48 Laws of Power podcast at gmail.com.
Be sure to check us out on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and like us on Facebook.
Listen in every Monday as we air new episodes.